Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the next President of the United States, Jeb. We want Jeb! We want Jeb! We want Jeb! We want Jeb! Saints Row 4 is shit. I mean, let's be honest, I could have just ended it there, really, couldn't I? Truth be told, folks, I didn't want to make this, but you just couldn't leave me alone, could you? Where's Saints Row 4? Where's Saints Row 4? Saints Row 4? Here's 10 things I'd rather have done than played Saints Row 4. Number 1. Die. Number 2. Browse Reddit. Number 3. Watch CNN. Number 4. Eat spinach. Number 5. Read feminist theory. Number 6. Have a haircut. Number 7. Fix my green screen. Number 8. Watch grown men play Fortnite. Number 9. Your mum. And number 10. Create large-scale dissent by pointing out the blatant flaws in Western neoliberalist establishments and the untenable position they face in the coming decades by eviscerating their unsustainable, socially progressive and economically conservative policies. And as we all know, I'd never do any of those ludicrous things, which should show you just how much I did not want to make this. But alas, as a man of the people, I simply couldn't let you down, dear viewer. And thus, it's finally time. Time for Saints Row 4. Or, as others like to call it, Saints Row Bore, Saints Row Snore, or my personal favourite of Saints Row, will Amazon hurry up and deliver that rope to my door? As you can probably tell, Saints Row 4 isn't exactly my favourite addition to the franchise, to absolutely no one's surprise. To say that this game has problems would be an understatement, but I also think, and prepare yourself now, that it isn't quite as doom and gloom as many like to make it out to be. Saints Row 4 is like a coin. It has two sides, and one side is really ugly and absolutely abhorrent, whereas the other is shockingly blissful and, dare I say, underrated. So, starting with the ugly side, what's the biggest problem with Saints Row 4? Well, the biggest problem is that the game is, fundamentally, an abortion. It was simply never meant to be, and had the developers actually been in control of their own creative destiny, would have never actually been made. Saints Row 4 was originally going to be called Saints Row Part 4, and was going to be much more grandiose than what we actually got. It was going to be set in a completely new city, and featured gangs based on the past, such as Genghis Khan's Mongols, Cleopatra's Egyptians, and even Joseph Stalin's Red Army. However, this concept was of course completely scrapped, not because the developers changed their mind, but because the publisher who owned Volition at the time, THQ, desperately needed some cash to stay afloat due to being on the verge of bankruptcy, because their finance department didn't know how to use Microsoft Excel properly. As such, they ordered Volition to come out with a new addition to the Saints Row series as soon as possible. And thus, Volition turned what was going to be a Saints Row the Third DLC pack into Saints Row 4. Now, I know a lot of people mourn the change as they say the originally planned Saints Row Part 4 sounded really cool. However, I for one don't mourn its loss at all, as to me, it sounds absolutely ridiculous. What I do mourn, however, is games from beloved franchises being rushed out the door simply to generate financial compensation out of desperation. Yet more proof, as if it was needed, that art and money simply do not mix. Indeed, the story of Saints Row 4's development is truly testament to just how sad the video game industry actually is. But enough about what could have been. What actually is? Well, Christ, where do I begin? Well, first things first, just in case you needed a sign that this is an American game that was made during the War on Terror, the game starts off with you on some sort of secret mission in the middle of a desert somewhere, fighting terrorists. On this mission, you save the world from being annihilated from weapons of mass destruction, and subsequently get elected to become the President of the United States. You then make your character, shout out to Blobby by the way, whereby you then play as the President for about 5 minutes, until, shock horror, aliens invade and everyone you know and love gets abducted, and you end up in a big cannon shooting UFOs. After which you come face to face with the alien emperor Zinyak, whereby you are then asked to do some quick time events to defend yourself in a cutscene battle. Not that it matters if you actually press the buttons, mind you, as the game will just proceed ahead as intended regardless, because the developers were too lazy to put in a defeat cutscene. You then find yourself in a simulation designed to torment you, whereby you are stuck in a 1950s style suburb. You then eventually break out of said simulation, only to end up in another simulation, whereby for the rest of the game you'll piss around there in order to defeat Zinyak once and for all. Does anyone remember when this series was about gangs? I mean, I was in that massive cannon shooting down UFOs, and I was just thinking to myself, how did we get here? Saints Row used to be about the struggle of growing up under a life of crime, whereas here, it's about mindless stupidity. What happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. Cowardice. Saints Row 1 and 2 were always compared to GTA because they were the only games on the market that actually had the balls to try to compete with them. But with Saints Row the Third, and especially this abomination, Volition simply stopped trying.
Well, you see, we could make a deep, serious gangster game that would just get called a GTA clone again. Or we'll just make the wackiest wank imaginable instead, and claim that that's what Saints Row has always been about all along.
It shouldn't have mattered to Volition when their work got slandered in such inaccurate ways by Luddites without taste, as instead they should have used it as motivation to continue to try ever more to dethrone the king from his throne. But no, instead they pivoted away from their adult demographic and doubled down on their newfound target market of teenagers instead. Because let's be honest, that's who this game was made for, sub-18-year-olds. Big explosions, fancy guns, whack, whack, and more whack. And hey, that's fine and all, but if you're gonna make a game like this, then how about making, I don't know, a completely new intellectual property instead? Rather than trying to double dip and wear the skin of your old one at the same time. Which, I might add, is a lesson that Volition seemingly still hasn't learned over a decade later. Saints Row 1 fans, let me ask you a question. Does this look like Saints Row to you? Or what about this? Or this? Or this? Or what about this?
No.
Yeah, being a Saints Row 1 fan and playing this is kind of like growing up to watch your daughter become a prostitute. This isn't the future I wanted for my beloved Saints Row, to put it mildly, so let's just get this out the way right here. If you expect me to talk about this game's story, forget about it, as the story, unlike the other games, is completely irrelevant. Why? Well, apart from the fact that Earth gets destroyed right at the start of the game, it all takes place in a simulation, and it's about fighting aliens, the story, rather than having a symbiotic relationship with the gameplay as in past games, is now a complete backdrop for the gameplay. It just isn't a story worth wasting oxygen discussing, because frankly, it doesn't matter regardless. What I will say, however, is that the game does seem more than aware that its story can't stand on its own two legs. Mostly as it pulls every trick possible to try to work its way out of its narrative emptiness. Constant fourth wall jokes about how the story makes no sense? Check. Reviving beloved characters that were once thought to be dead? Check. Having an entire mission where you go back to the first game as fan service? Check. I mean, hell, this was actually my favourite part of the game, truth be told. But it's quite telling when my favourite part of this entire game is merely a reference to the first one. But hey, I will give Saints Row 4 some credit. In many ways, it is actually quite prophetic. For example, it accurately predicted that the presidency of the United States would become a joke, and it also predicted that aliens were real, which, as the US government themselves has admitted in recent years, is factually the case. You thought Tic Tacs were just funny-looking sweets now, did you? No. It's called predictive programming. Wake up, sheeple! Now, because the game is an abortion and was made very quickly, it essentially just recycles almost all of Saints Row III's assets, from clothes, guns, and even the city. Saints Row 4 is to Saints Row III what Saints Row 2 was to Saints Row 1, meaning that it merely builds on top of it rather than being its own thing. Though the difference is that whereas Saints Row 2 arguably improved Stillwater in many ways, I refuse to believe that anyone would seriously try to make the argument that Saints Row 4's Steelport is better than Saints Row III's. The city is borderline identical, but because it's meant to be an oppressive simulation, it always has this smoggy red night skyline which feels like depression being injected directly into your veins. Unlike past games whereby you would get somewhat immersed in the city, here, because of its fictional blatancy, you're under no illusion that this is, indeed, just a game. Which again, kind of goes against everything the series once stood for, but whatever. However, I will give Saints Row 4 some credit for once again being quite prophetic, as throughout this simulated Steelport lies numerous signs that remind you that you're naught more than a minion. Which is very reminiscent of the attitude that many governments around the world have had towards their own citizens over the last few years. Truly, a game ahead of its time. Saints Row 4 annoys me greatly because it's so fundamentally different to all the other games in the series that all of the things that I usually talk about don't really apply here. For example, gangs. As for the gangs, there are no gangs. Activities? Irrelevant. The city? Same thing. The story? Bollocks. I mean, what else is there to say really when you're talking about a game where you fight a giant energy drink can called Paul? For anyone like myself who views Saints Row's destiny as being tied to the first two games, there's simply nothing of nutritional value here for us to enjoy. It's just, to put it bluntly, wank. However, I did say that Saints Row 4 was a coin with two sides, and whereas its story is, without any shadow of a doubt, smelly, I actually believe that Saints Row 4's gameplay is absolutely fantastic. If you can put aside the fact that the game is an abortion, if you can put aside the fact that the game is an asset flip, and if you can, somehow, wipe your mind's memory of any reference to what the series once was and simply view this game through the lens of gameplay, then what you have here is genuinely, and I'm not joking with you when I say this, one of the greatest superhero games of all time. Because the game takes place in a simulation, the gameplay revolves around you, the player, having superpowers that you can use to defeat your enemies. And I have to be honest, these superpowers have been implemented in a seriously impressive fashion. The passive powers, such as Super Sprint and Super Jump, make you feel as if you're Spider-Man on crack. And the combat powers, such as Freezing, Flaming, Telekinesis, Stomp and Buff, all feel very unique and well designed. To the point where, from a purely gameplay perspective, it's hard to deny that the game is incredibly fun. I'm not even going to try to deny it. Flying around Shitport collecting clusters gives me the same satisfying feeling as scratching an itch you've been holding off on. Yes. It shouldn't do. I mean, really, it's very low-effort nonsense if you really think about it, just littering your map with a bunch of collectibles everywhere. But it really is weirdly entertaining, collecting them and then upgrading your powers bit by bit. And I'm not going to be a Grinch and pretend otherwise. As I said earlier, if this game wasn't called Saints Row 4, but was instead its own intellectual property, maybe with some comic book style graphics and similar wacky humour, Volition probably could have had another series on their hands with the same purchasing power that Saints Row has. And considering the fact that after making this, they attempted to do just that, albeit worse in almost every way, shows that had they been in charge of their own destiny, that's probably what this game would have ended up being. Instead, rather than living in that world of clear definitions, we live in a world whereby gangster games have aliens in them. Oh, by the way, did I mention that you can have intercourse with your fellow saints now? Yeah, wanna see? Take a look. Excuse me, what do you think you're doing? I warned you that you were about to see an unholy deed, and what did you do? Did you skip ahead? Did you stop watching? No. You carried on watching. You make me sick. Oh yes, intercourse. Oh, I love watching pixel people screw each other. Oh yes, I'm a Kuma who has no self-control and can't stop thinking about lust. Yes, I'm gonna coom. Time to repent. Many societies have passed away before you, so travel the earth and note the fate of the deniers. This is a proclamation to humanity, and guidance and advice for the righteous. And do not waver nor feel remorse. You are the superior ones, if you are believers. And don't you forget it, Kuma. Hilariously enough, before you get your powers, the game functions like any other Saints Row, with cars and the like. However, obviously after getting them, you're pretty much never going to use a car again, because, well, why would you? Which may make one wonder, well in that case, how do people listen to tunes? And the answer is, as you're in a simulation, sound can simply be directly streamed into your brain at all times. So you can now listen to the radio, car or no car. Which, I'm gonna be honest, sounds like the nightmare dystopian future we're heading into if Elon Musk gets his way, whereby rather than going to prison, criminals will instead just be sentenced to listen to 12 hours worth of uninterrupted Ariana Grande instead. The horror. Which brings us on to the tier list. Saints Row 4, being an abortion, has the least amount of radio stations on offer, with just 7 stations in total. And yes, that is less than even the first game. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that games were meant to get more ambitious as time goes by, not less. Christ almighty. Right, S tier. Classic. There's something about jumping around like a lunatic blowing stuff up while listening to Mozart in the background that really tickles my pickle. It's an odd juxtaposition that is very amusing for some reason. It's like, have you ever seen an explosion with classical music on in the background? It's oddly relaxing. Just me. And tied on S tier, The Mix, of course. Yeah, I mean, you can't really go wrong with 80s and 90s pop, can you? I mean, it's kind of like a secret cheat code that immediately makes the game better in almost every way. Top stuff. A tier, 420. You know, as I get older, for some reason, I've started to appreciate reggae more and more. It's like, when it feels like the world is slowly burning down around you, you just put a bit of bob on, and suddenly, every little thing feels like it's gonna be alright. Is this what getting old feels like? B tier, K12. Yeah, whereas this station usually sounds like robots having intercourse, I actually weirdly enjoyed it this time around for some reason. Probably more as it fits with the whole simulation theme. Not bad, not good either, but not bad. C tier, Gen X. Again, nothing's changed. It's still the same emo, cry me a river, I want to cut my wrists because my hormones are going crazy crap. But for some reason, it wasn't as painful as it was usually, so hey, I'll be generous. This time. D tier, Mad Decent, or as I like to call it, just mad, as in mutually assured destruction, because listening to this made me feel like my ears were about to go on strike. And lastly, we're heading straight to F tier, with K-Rhyme. What on earth happened to this station? Whereas K-Rhyme was filled with some top bangers in the first 2 games, here, I don't know what to say. How am I meant to enjoy tracks like Atmosphere Until the Nipple's Gone, or White Weird Donald Trump Walk, or best of all, ELP Full Re... what the hell happened to rap music after 2010? I like raps that flow with powerful emotive rhymes. However, these days, it's all about who can talk the fastest. Just absolute crap. I tell you, Eminem is the worst for this. Back in the 90s, he ruled the world with his rhythmic, controversial tracks. Now, he's a 50-year-old man in a hoodie with a corporate hand so far up his arse, he can no longer stand up straight. "No, you can't say that about my king," says every fatherless 16-year-old Zoomer who idolises dossers. Oh, celebrity-worshipping twats. Comparing pre-2010 rap to post-2010 rap is like comparing the America of the past to the America of the present. How did you guys go from big winner to kid sniffer in the space of a single generation? It's honestly quite mind-blowing, fellas. Then again, look who's talking. Jesus Christ, K-Rhyme in Saints Row 4 is so bad that it just made me go on a rant about rap, Eminem, and US presidents all in the same minute. That's how crap it actually is. Oh, what a fall from grace. Much like the series as a whole, really. Yeah, overall, Saints Row 4 is pretty crap. Though I can't deny, I do like the idea of being President of the United States. I can't because I'm British, but hey, if I was, what would I do? What would be my first executive order?